Welcome, everybody. I'm Lucy Duncan, the Director of Friends Relations, and welcome to the third evening of the corporation program entitled Making Worlds Pursuing Peace with Justice. I'm really excited to welcome you to the workshop tonight, Pursuing Freedom for Palestine, Campaign for Palestinian Children's Rights, which Jennifer Bing and Zeina Hutchison are going to be leading tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Zeina and Jennifer, and grateful that you all are here.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Zeina Ashrawi Hutchison. I'm truly honored to be here, and thank you so much again for coming. I was born and raised in Palestine, and my experience and my narrative is very much shaped and based on my own the narrative that I personally experienced. And so it's oftentimes emotional. So I'm going to preface this. This is why I'm saying this. I'm going to preface this whole thing by saying my sincere apologies if there's a tear or two there. They're genuinely hard to control because this is a lived experience, and it's really important to me to relay that information because as Palestinians growing up in Palestine, one of our biggest tasks and one of our biggest tools in order to keep our stories and our struggle alive is by continuing sharing our stories. It's an amana, it's a trust. You're entrusted with these stories the moment you leave home. This amana that I carry with me, that I share, the stories, the amana of children of the first intifada primarily, which is when I grew up, the uprising, the Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation. It wasn't easy, but there were things that were normal that should not have been normal. Fears that for us were normal that should not have been normal. The sight of children blindfolded and taken into military jeeps for us was normal, but later on we realized obviously it's not normal. Stories from our friends who were taken from schools or from their homes when they return of the treatment that they've gotten inside Israeli military prisons, to us were common and normalized to an extent, but they're not normal. They're an experience that nobody really should ever go through, adult or child for that matter. But it's part of the systemic abuse and the systemic occupation of Palestine. It's not just on the ground, it's very much psychological. And it starts at a very young age with these arrests and children being detained. In front of my house when I grew up was the Israeli military prison. So in addition to seeing the images and seeing my friends in the streets and other children being detained publicly around me and hearing about it in schools, in front of my house was the Israeli military detention center, where every day Palestinians were released at all hours of the night. They would come to our house. My parents would have blankets and for them on the floor to sleep because they were released without further notice. Some were there for days, some for weeks. We never knew. Some were children, some were adults. But that experience resonated so much with me because those children that would come to our house who have been taken from their parents' homes have no idea where they are. And my parents opened their home and they took care of them. And I grew up with that image as a normal. And as soon as I heard about the No Way to Treat a Child campaign, it was a calling that I couldn't not answer. It was something that I had to work on, to carry the stories of the Palestinian children, to advocate for them, but to also to educate and let you all know that what Palestinian children go through is part of the systemic oppression, is part of the long-term systemic oppression. Because as adults now, we still struggle with those images. So from torture to pain to all of it, it's there. And we often talk about Palestine and Palestinians, especially when it comes to to actions and motivations here in the States in the abstract, in documents, in bills, which we will talk about later. But it's the humanization of the cause. These children are people's mothers and fathers' children. They're siblings to people. They have, you know, friends at school. I had those friends at school. They were in jail. And so we have to remember that whenever we write those bills, whenever we advocate for those bills. And so I carry my amana and I tell my stories now through No Way to Treat a Child campaign. And it's incredibly important to continue carrying their stories now and then, the stories that have passed from the first Intifada, but continue now, because now they've evolved and developed. So it is, you know, extremely important for me to do this with my good friend Jennifer. We have very similar experiences, but from different perspectives. I lived it in, you know, in a daily life, and it was kind of the norm for me. But I also saw solidarity in people like Jennifer, people who cared, people who listened, people who paid attention, people who carried our stories when they didn't have to. And so I'm going to pass it on to Jennifer to tell her story and why she joined.
Thank you, Zeina. And it's so nice to see. I'm sorry, I'm getting the sun setting as we speak here in Chicago. It's so great to see so many familiar names in the participant box today. And yeah, I'm just so thrilled to be here, and to be here with Zeina is just so special for many reasons. What brings me to this work is I remember my first visit to Palestine was in 1982. And on that very first visit, I experienced an army night raid of when Israeli soldiers came to the village that I was visiting. And I experienced what the Palestinian family experienced as soldiers busted into their house, and the children were screaming and crying, and how defenseless the parents were at that time to protect their kids, and just to kind of disrupt one's whole evening and whole day. And I went back after that experience in 1982 to teach at the Ramallah Friends School in 1986, at a time when Zeina was attending that school. She was a student at the girls' school, and I was teaching at the boys' school. And I know some of you on this call tonight have been visitors to Ramallah and been supporters of the Friends schools there for many years. And when I went there in 1986, I was excited to be a teacher and to learn from my students. And that got disrupted by the first Intifada. In December of 1987, the Israeli army closed the school, and we had to kind of make do with underground schools and just being part of actually a very incredible shaking, an intifada, a resistance to the occupation. And during that time, I began to work for Save the Children on a report that was to document the experience of Palestinian children. And that report meant I was a researcher. I traveled with a Palestinian translator, and we met hundreds of families, Palestinian families throughout the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem, and interviewed them about what was happening to their children, children who were being killed, children who were being injured, children who were impacted by collective punishments like long-term curfews and so forth. And that really was, I mean, all of this was life-changing experience, but that hearing the stories, what Zeina so beautifully described, of hearing the stories, but also knowing that in hearing them and witnessing them, I had a duty to share them with a wider audience. I remember having a crisis of conscience actually about doing that documentation work, because it was making people relive the pain, relive the incredible trauma that they were experiencing, especially mothers who had lost their children, kids who had seen their friends shot and killed, and or been in detention. So that really motivated me to come back to the United States and to share those stories. And luckily, that's when I began my home here at the American Friends Service Committee. So since 1989, I've been working with AFSC and trying to have other people hear the stories that I witnessed, and to bring Palestinians themselves to talk to Americans about what their experiences were, about how the U.S. is complicit in the occupation and in the oppression that Palestinians face. It was in 2015 or 2014 actually, that part of one of those speaking tours, we were hosting Defense for Children International-Palestine staff on a speaking tour that they were doing, talking about children in detention. And as we met them here in Chicago, we kind of sat together after the presentation, and they said to us, like, we're ready to do advocacy. We want to find ways to amplify these stories of children in detention and their families, and the impact to a wider audience. And thus began the experience between AFSC and Defense for Children International-Palestine, and the birth of the No Way to Treat a Child campaign that we're going to talk about tonight. And we have exciting news about a new bill that's being introduced this week, and a lot of tips that that Zeina and I want to share with you about our experiences advocating. But before that, we want to have each of us kind of introduce each other, and we're a large group, 70 people at this point. So we're going to break into small groups, and we hope that in these small groups that you'll introduce yourself, maybe say what your Quaker affiliation is, and that what brought you to this workshop. Zeina and I have shared our stories. And in a few minutes' time, we have only 10 minutes, but we hope we'll have groups of 5. If you can just share with one another, and then we'll return to the larger group in a few minutes.
We are here obviously to learn about the No Way to Treat a Child campaign. And again, thanks for joining us. And I hope you had a good conversation in the chats while you were away. And got to speak a little bit about each other's experience. But the No Way to Treat a Child campaign really is about what both Jennifer and I spoke about. It's about the arrests, it's about the process, it's about the transfer, the interrogation, the hearings, the sentencing. It all goes hand in hand, and the No Way to Treat a Child campaign has been developed in order to bring awareness to the different stages, but also the tragedy in each stage. And the abuse and the injustice in each stage. So, from systemic ill treatment and torture of children, to holding them without their parents for, during interrogation and after, not having proper representation, if at all. So it's very systemic, and it's been used over and over. So the No Way to Treat a Child campaign revolves around bringing awareness, and also, elevating those issues so that hopefully we can fix this and release all the Palestinian prisoners. But that said, I'm going to pass it on to Jennifer to tell us more about this.
If you could forward to the next slide. I don't know if it's Lucy or Halik. Yeah. So this is a graphic that we developed early on in the No Way to Treat a Child campaign. I know many of you are familiar with if you are familiar with our campaign, you're familiar with this graphic. But it's a useful graphic because it helps us tell the story about Palestinian children in detention, and it helps. Yeah, it just basically helps to ground the experiences of arrest and transfer, blindfolded and handcuffed, being held in interrogation by without your parents present, without a lawyer present, being taken into a hearing where a child, the hearing itself is conducted in a language that they don't understand, and where 99% of the people who are tried in a military court are convicted. So once they're convicted, then children are put into prison. A typical typical sentence for throwing stones, which is the most typical charges, is about 3 months in detention. And oftentimes children are transferred to prisons that aren't even in the West Bank, so that they're held in Israel. So this is part of the process, that when we sit down to talk to members of Congress or to introduce the campaign to somebody who's new, this is a graphic that we'll use as we describe what I just described very quickly. The next slide, please. The campaign itself, I mentioned that it was kind of it's a partnership between AFSC and Defense for Children International-Palestine, which is a group based in Ramallah, a Palestinian human rights child advocacy organization. And as I mentioned, they came to AFSC, and together we really believed that our work, we wanted to have a campaign that was focused on trying to change the perspective of members of Congress, of getting them to pass better laws, of changing US policy. But we also really believed that the campaign was important in mobilizing people at the grassroots level, of getting people conversant about the issue in all parts of the country. So the next slide, please. I want to just go through very quickly some of the beginnings of the campaign. So I mentioned in 2015, we started, and one of the things that we started with was creating a video called Detaining Dreams, which a couple of people who are on the call tonight will remember, because they were instrumental in helping getting that video made. But that video was really a centerpiece for having conversations with the public and with members of Congress that really centered the experience of Palestinian children themselves. So it was children talking about their experience of being arrested in the middle of the night, being held in detention in very unsanitary and unsafe conditions, and then their experience. We started with a congressional briefing, and that there's a picture there that you can see where we had a young Palestinian American actually testify to his own experience. And after that congressional briefing, we we found a champion for the cause, basically, and they introduced a Dear Colleague letter that really just started the conversation between Congress and the State Department on the issue of child detention. We knew that the US State Department had in its human rights reports year after year full documentation about what was happening to Palestinian children, that they were aware of the UNICEF reports, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all the documentation. They acknowledged it, but it wasn't really acknowledged by members of Congress. So in 2015 was the first time that we saw lawmakers starting to speak out. In the next slide, the second year of the campaign, we came back with a second Dear Colleague. Instead of just saying, we're aware of this issue, we started a process of saying, well, how do we hold the issue account? How do we start to hold people accountable? And in that second year, we had members of Congress sign and send a public letter to then to the State Department saying, you know, we're not only just concerned about the issue, but we think that there needs to be a special envoy that will look into the issue in more depth. So again, nothing there that was talking about aid, for instance, or it was basically, we want you to learn more information. So this is, I'm sharing all this to kind of show the gradual approach of seasoning the issue with members of Congress. The next slide, please. In that time period, we were anticipating that we would be electing a president that would be very interested in children's rights and would be, and I'm talking about Hillary Clinton. Instead, we had a different outcome of that election. And so our first task was to say again to the new administration that we want to hold you accountable. There are a lot of people that care about this issue. We did a petition to the State Department the day after inauguration with 11,000 people signing, saying that we wanted to prioritize this issue in the American public. Next slide. And we're hoping that there would be some change. Well, with the new administration, Democrats, I felt, got to be a bit bolder about critiquing the administration. And I think that really did set the stage, as well as this constant work at the grassroots level to educate our members of Congress, led to the very first bill. So no longer was it a Dear Colleague letter that was just a sense of Congress, but an actual bill that would be read into the congressional record and have an implication that laws could be changed. So that first bill was, I always mark that November 14th date. It should be a celebratory date for Palestinians around the world, because it really was the first bill in US history that centered the rights of Palestinians. And to our delight, that bill got 30 co-sponsors across the country. And when you look at who, because people always want to ask who were sponsoring this type of legislation, many came from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but they also came from districts where there was really solid activism, where communities had been engaging with their members of Congress and bringing and talking about this issue. Next slide. So here you can see some of the resources that we developed on the No Way to Treat a Child website, where we would provide fact sheets, and you could go there to see the tally of who was co-sponsoring. You could see who are the endorsing organizations. So all of this, once you have a bill that has the length of a whole congressional session, which is 2 years, then it's a good talking point. So you don't have to do it within a week or something. That is often the case when you have Dear Colleague letters. So the next slide. we had a second bill, and this was in the last Congress, and I know many of you helped to push on getting the passage of HR 2407, which was the Promoting Human Rights of Palestinian Children Living Under Occupation Act. A mouthful, but we always like to remind people that when we talk about Palestinian children's rights, we do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it was really by chance that we had 2407 as the number. I wish we could choose the bill number, but that's not how it works, of course. But that bill was what we were advocating for in the last Congress. Next slide, please. Through that, more and more members of Congress were speaking out, different members of Congress too. It gave us an opportunity, again, like the previous bill. I mean, 24 congressional co-sponsors is way far away than a majority in the House, and we were aware of that, but it still gave us some concrete ways to have the conversation about Palestinian rights with an actual ask. So that was part of the beauty of that bill. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to turn it back to Zeina, because she also is an example of somebody who living at a local level that took the momentum of the bill in Congress and the conversations there to work at a more local level.
Thank you, Jennifer. In fact, everything that I've said before and everything that has been spoken before, whether it's within the context of No Way to Treat a Child or within the context of my personal experience or Jennifer's personal experience, essentially for me culminated in this 2407 resolution that passed in Virginia. It wasn't just historic for Virginia. It was, for me, solidified my desire and my will and my determination to continue the work that I do because of people like Jennifer and like No Way to Treat a Child campaign and the AFSC's involvement in this. Because exactly what Jennifer said, 2407 is a tangible document that you can work with, you can introduce to people, you can use it to discuss the situation, but you can also use it to further the Palestinian cause and bring more substantial change and hope to the issue. So very briefly, I mean, for me, this fell in my lap. I was working, I got elected as a delegate for Bernie Sanders. I felt that I had a platform, I had a voice that I didn't have before. People were listening to me as a delegate. People were taking my words into consideration, and I had to really choose what I said at that point. So as I sat there and I thought I need to write a resolution to try to pass something on Palestine, and the one thing that kept coming to mind, is the fact that you cannot argue with fighting for Palestinian children's rights, for children's rights in general, for children in military detention in particular, without their parents, without their representation, tortured, abused for years. And we spoke about the trauma that lives with you and stays with you. So to me, this was vindication in a way. I sat down and I wrote down my resolution, and then I put 2407 in there. And it passed. It passed at the congressional district level. And then it passed at state level. And the accomplishment with that wasn't just merely also that it passed in a congressional level and a state level, but the attention that it got, because it started from the grassroots and it grew. So it brought attention to the 2407 bill, but also created conversation. And people weren't afraid to ask questions and discuss the issue. And they had a resource, they had a source, not just me in my personal experience, but also a bill that they can work with, something that they can use that bill and my voice and what we have here in the bill to further the cause, to feel like they are doing something and not just theoretically on the grand scheme of things saying, what can I do? This is something we could do. And it gave me so much pride and joy to when it passed, to feel a sense of accomplishment and contribution to the work that many have done for so long. And it might be just a tiny win in the grand scheme of things, but it meant the world to so many. And I know it was vindication for me, for the little me, the young me who grew up hoping that I can make a difference for Palestinians. And as an adult, continually looking back and reaching back and trying to bring the love and, everything I could for Palestinian children who are now grown or those who are still in Israeli military prisons now, that we are thinking of them, that we are fighting for them on every level, on the national level, on state level, in conversations, in the media, in documentation, in every way possible. Palestinian lives and the Palestinian narrative lives in documents like 24/7s, and it empowers people like me who work on, who are activists, but also work on human rights and work on people's rights in general. So, it was an easy decision to put 24/7 in there, and I'm so excited about future bills, but also to continue the work on Palestine and for the Palestinians within 24/7 in and of itself, because it's near and dear to my heart. We all have our bills, if you will, but I'm excited for the new bill as well that I know Jennifer had mentioned earlier. And we all can do this. I mean, if I could do it as somebody who had no idea what a bill was, to getting to a point where I'm actually discussing 24/7 with some elected officials or with influencers in the community, this is huge, and it's thanks to campaigns like No Way to Treat a Child that make it easy and accessible, and make everybody around them feel that it is necessary to take the next step in promoting something like this. So I'm really excited that it passed, and now it's officially part of the 2020 Democratic Convention in Virginia, historically. And I am going to, I believe, pass it back. May I see the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm passing it back to Jennifer. Yeah.
Yeah. So in our workshop tonight, we wanted to give you some concrete tips, some lessons learned from our work on this issue. And if you go to the next slide, we thought of giving you 5 tips, five fingers on your hands. You can remember them easily. Actually, if anyone's interested in this slide deck or anything afterwards, we're always we're happy to share them with you. But the first important thing is to learn about the issue. Not all of us were born like Zeina, living across the street from a military detention center. Many of you may not have sat in a military court like I had the opportunity to, but there are a lot of resources out there to learn about the issue. The No Way to Treat a Child website, and we'll put the link in the chat here, has so much information about the issue. As I mentioned earlier, there are lots of reports by UNICEF and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and B'Tselem and a lot of human rights documentation about the issue. And I think our No Way to Treat a Child website gives a nice opportunity, whether you're a reader or you prefer to look at films or you, whatever your medium is for how you learn best, I think you'll find it on that website. So that's number one, is to learn about the issue. Obviously, being able to talk about an experience to an elected official is super important, to know your facts and to have the background to going into a conversation.
And number two, when you do have that information and you learn about the issues on the website that's provided in the chat for you right now, it is so important to build that relationship with the elected officials, like Jennifer was saying, because those relationships and that trust that you build will further the understanding of the subject. In this case, you all would be learning about the issue and then discussing it openly with your elected officials. Keep the lines of communications open. It takes time sometimes to build that relationships, but make those phone calls. You are constituents. You have a right to speak to your representatives and demand answers and ask questions and have a conversation with them. It might be intimidating to start, but pick up that phone, look up those emails and reach out, because you can make a difference. Every single voice and voicemail or phone call, or every single letter that you write, and every single meeting that you have with these elected officials, you're building on an effort that is already established in the process, but also you become part of the movement, which is what we need from those who are experts talking to elected officials like Jennifer and others, and those who are constituents just concerned about the issues. So you have the right to do it. Please reach out to your elected officials. You don't have to be an expert on the issue. You can even bring attention to your elected officials to the No Way to Treat a Child campaign if they don't know about it already. And then with that,
yeah, so the third thing, the finding opportunities to speak up. I know that we're living in a pandemic and the ability to interact with strangers may have been changed forever, but my hope is still someday that we will be able to strike up conversations with people who are selling us things at Target, or that we pass on the street and they see a button that says "No Way to Treat a Child" on our lapel, and they want to talk to us about it. But there's even if you're not an extrovert or don't want to wear a button that shows your politics on your sleeve, there are other ways to bring the issue into your community by many ways. One thing that we found really helpful is to bring films and to bring speakers into the community. A lot of people are watching things online now, and it's a great way to watch a film together and have a conversation about it. So looking for opportunities. Also, I think in some cases, we certainly, when a lot of attention was placed on our own US treatment of children in detention, whether it was at the border or in our communities during COVID, there was a lot of opportunities to talk about the systemic issues that are facing both people in this country and in Palestine. So that's number 3.
Yeah, and I mean, continuing on that note and following up on what Jennifer said, it all falls together, because what we are trying to do is essentially bringing people into the conversation. And what that means, it doesn't always mean that they agree with you, and it doesn't always mean that they know as much as you do, or maybe they know more, but bringing people into the conversation means the conversation continues and can be built upon and can spread in a community, of course. And so that can lead to positive outcomes for a project. But in the grand scheme of things, keeping the narrative alive and spreading the word, if you will, happens by bringing people into the conversation, precisely those that either don't know anything about the issue, or by engaging those that are afraid or don't want to ruffle any feathers, if you will. So bringing them into the conversation also can mean going back to number 3, inviting them to a talk of, that you're holding, for example, or that somebody is holding. It's really, really important. But also, by the same token, is that we don't just represent one issue. The Palestinian issue, particularly Palestinian children in general, are applied to everybody across the board. There shouldn't be a difference. So when we are discussing Palestinian children or Palestinian human rights, it is an intersectional issue. You work on on multi different levels. Like here in Virginia, I'm part of multiple different organizations and groups, and I can see Palestine applying to all of it and the discussion on Palestine applying to all of it. Of course, I don't do it all the time, but it's important to recognize the opportunity to speak on issues that revolve around the work that we do for Palestine, Palestinian rights, within the coexistence frame of the other issues that are important to your friends and family, to people around you, and in politics.
And the last thing is to ask for feedback and not be afraid to make mistakes. If you go to the next slide, I want to say that one of the things in our campaign is we have monthly webinars where we give an update on the situation on the ground in Palestine, but we also try to answer difficult questions that come up for people. So we have debunking sessions where we'll take some hard question that may come up and try to answer it for people. Really, one can never be perfect in how it presents information to a member of Congress. We're all human, but it is good to go with a friend or to get feedback on, was this approach a good one? Should we emphasize one thing more than the other? I think the great hard, fast rule is that, practice makes perfect, that you just keep on working and doing it. And, sooner or later, it doesn't become such a stressful thing to make a phone call to your member of Congress, or if you see them at the gym, going up to them and telling them what you think. Like, you get more confidence the more often you engage. So those are some 5 tips, and if you sign up for the No Way to Treat a Child campaign on the website, you'll get a notice when these monthly webinars are happening. In fact, we have one coming up next week that will be explaining the new legislation that's coming out this week. But if we could move to the next slide. At this point in our presentation, we are going to watch together a film called Obeida that was produced by Defense for Children International-Palestine. And we felt like in tonight's workshop, we'd really like you to have the experience of listening to some Palestinian children who have gone through the process that we were describing. So we're going to watch that film together, and then we'll go back into our small groups where we can debrief a little bit about our reactions to the film and what ideas that maybe occur to you while watching the film that would be good information to pass on to your members of Congress or to your friends and family who might not know much about the issue.
أول شيء بقيت أفكر كيف بدي أطلع، كيف بدي أمشي أيامي. تحسك إنك لما بقيت جوا بقيت منعزل عن العالم الخارجي تماماً.
عندك خوف إنك تنسجن كمان مرة ولا كيف؟
زي شو المشكلة الرئيسية؟ خط 60 إنه بس كيف تقطع وتفجوا المخيم، لأنه عند خط 60 هم ملك الشارع. أنا عبيد أكرم جوابرة، مخيم العروب شمال الخليل. عمري تقريبا 15 سنة وبحب أطبخ. عندك مخيم العروب كله دور صغيرة وعدد الأفراد اللي فيها كبير كثير ومساحة الدور صغيرة، حتى إنه في الشباك مثلا بفتح على شباك جارك، يعني الحيط في الحيط زي ما يسموها. وعندك توقك صغيرة، وعندك برضو الناس فيها كثير طيبين، كثير مناح جدعان، بوقفوا معك في المشاكل. فيش حياة الأطفال مأساوية، لا في ألعاب زي العالم، لا في حرية. تم اعتقالي مرتين من قبل الاحتلال. عندي كانت تجربة الأولى مأساوية جدا، حتى كنت أنا ماشي أروح على الدكان أشتري، اعتقلوني. لما اعتقلوني في مركز التحقيق حطوا لي كلبش بلاستيك، كلبشتين نفس الشيء في نفس الإيد، حتى كان ضيق ما بقدرش أحرك إيدي لا لفوق ولا لتحت. وكان حطوا لي عصبة خميلة، وحتى حطوها لمنخاري ما بقدرش أتنفس بصعوبة. تعرف لما تمشي انت مش شايف اشي، طريق غريب، ضلك ماشي وضلك في دايخ وخايف ومتردد. حتى هم كانوا مثلا يقول لي انزل الدرج، بقاش في درج، بقول ارفع رجلك خلوني اقع. بس طبعا كان ما يضربش الا على المناطق الغير حساسه، حتى ما تشهدش ضدهم او تثبتش اشاره ضدهم. صارت اشياء كثير لما وقفت في السجن وروحت شفت اشياء كثير متغيره. لما رجعت كانت المواد كلها متراكمه جدا علي، حتى انه ما عرفتش لا اختار لا هذا ولا هذا.
عبيدة هاي مثلا ترتبها شوية هيك، لأن في عنا أنواع يتم تشتيلها بالبذور، في عنا أنواع بالفسائل بالعقل، كويس؟ هاي مثلا نوع من أنواع النبات يتم تشتيله إيش؟ من خلال النبت نفسه. في عنا التكاثر الجنسي وفي عنا التكاثر اللاجنسي، كويس؟
فرحت على الصناعيه عشان المواد برضو كانت المواد متراكمه جدا، وعملوا لي امتحانات شهرين فتغلبت كثير. كنت كل يوم بقيت اقرا كل كتاب.
لما تشعل شو بتعمل؟ تبعد ايدك 2 ميلي.
انه اجيب علامات عاليه، انه اثبت وجود، انه ما راحش تعبكم وهيك، ما راحش انكم قبلتوني راح تاثر علي طريقه السجن. بس
أنا رشيد عرار، المرشد المهني لمدرسة العروبة الزراعية. وزي ما احنا شايفين هون هذا الشارع شارع 60 اللي بمر منه كثير من المستوطنين اللي بيعملوا لنا إشكالية كبيرة في هذا المكان، لأنه احنا موجودين على
ايش هذا الصوت؟
هذا الجرس. احنا موجودين على منطقة احتكاك بيؤدي لانه مرات يصير في اعتداءات من قبل قوات الاحتلال على الاطفال، اعتقالات، مداهمات للمدرسة. الأطفال أول ما بيجوا سواء كان معتقل قبل ما يجي عنا أو بيتم اعتقاله عنا وبعدين بيلتحق بالمدرسة، بنجد إنه في صعوبة أثناء دمجه مع الطلاب. يعني مش بالسهل إنه يتفاعل، مش بالسهل إنه يبني علاقات، مش بالسهل إنه يبني صداقات. مرات عنده ردات فعل مش محسوبة. هذا الموضوع بنشتغل عليه على إنه نعيده لتوازنه، نعيده لإنه يرجع يندمج مع الأطفال، يبني علاقات، ينتظم بالمدرسة، يتخلص من بعض السلوكيات اللي شوي بتأثر عليه من ناحية سلبية.
بلشت افكر ليش احنا غير عن اطفال العالم، ليش بس تعيين فلسطين بروحوا بتسجلوا اعمارهم صغيره وبندهكوا في الحياه، وهم غانم مبسوطين بروحوا على جيم، على كره سله، على تدريبات، عندهم امكانيات كثير احسن منا. كنت اقارن كيف ليش هم هيك واحنا هيك. هذا السؤال لحد الان ما حدا جاوبنا عليه. ليش رحت الزراعة الكلية غاد؟
نباتي وعشان الحيواني وعندنا في علاقات هذول.
أنا بتعرف ليش رحت؟ عشان أشهد المواد العلمية، فيزياء وكيمياء وأحياء،
صعوبات كثير.
أنا شرت منهم. ومنيح الزراعة، يعني وظيفة محترمة ورا مكتب وتشتغل لحالك وقائد نفسك. أنا هذا الشيء اللي بحبه. دوك تكون ورا مكتب حتى يداوم عليك سوي هيك سوي هيك، تملك نفسك أحسن.
صحيح. لما كنا جوا بس نفكر بس يوم نطلع محكمة عشان هيك نضيع وقت.
الزراعة
محكمة الزراعة.
قدر نشوف بلاد بلدنا، قدر نبسط.
بلاد بلدنا ويوم الزيارات وهيك. يوم الزيارة تشوف أهلك. هاي الأشياء المنيحة في السجن. إنك
شيء منيح هو.
شيء منيح هو، بس في أشياء بتعلمك إنه
زي الصبر في الامتناع،
تصبر، تنظم حالك.
كنت مروط انا بالسجن طبخ جوا. شوف تعبد بتعرف.
بعرف.
علمني الطبخ، حبني الشاب وعلمني الطبخ. وعندنا كان جابوا شيف من الاقسام الثانيه إنه أطلع 3 2 معهم اسمه مساعد الطباخ. فاشتغلنا معه وعلمنا شغلة. تعلمت مهارة الطبخ وتعلمت مهارة التعامل مع الناس، الأدب، الاحترام. بحس حالي حر بس مش الحرية التامة، عندك لازم أول شيء تتحرر عشان أحس حالي حر تماما. بس برضه في عندك إنك حر تطلع وقت ما بدك، تيجي وقت ما بدك في التاكسي، تحكي ما بدك، تتزاحم ما بدك. كان عندك خلاص إرادة شخصية، شو بدك بتسوي. أنا هذا كنت مفتقره جوا. بس واحد مش متحررين كيف بدي أعيش الفرحة تمام 100%، يعني حتى جزء من الفرحة اكتملت.
Well, I think as everyone is returning, we did try to time out this workshop so that we would be able to get through a lot of material. But I do hope that you had some good conversations in your breakout groups. If you happen to have an idea that came in your breakout group that you'd like to share in the chat, so others can hear your ideas or your reactions, I welcome you to do that at this point. But we're going to move on with our slides and in our workshop. So what we would like to talk about next, if you could advance this, is some tools that are available for your advocacy. And we've talked about some things to keep in mind to be a good advocate. And now we're going to talk about some tools. The first thing, if the next slide, is very exciting news. I think you are the first public audience that I can share the news that this Friday, the champion of Palestinian rights in Congress, and I was thrilled to see that we have one of her constituents on the call tonight, Representative Betty McCollum from Minnesota, will be introducing yet another. This will be the third bill on Friday. We don't have a number yet. We'll get that probably late Thursday night, but check in with AFSC and follow us on social media and so forth, and you'll see what the number is. But the name of it is called Defending Human Rights of Palestinian Children and Families Living Under Israeli Military Occupation. And the difference with the families being added is that this bill does talk about child detention and similar to previous bills, talking about not wanting to have U.S. funding go towards the practices of detaining and abusing Palestinian children. But this new bill will also talk about home demolitions. And sadly, we've seen even during this time of COVID, an uptick in the demolition of Palestinian homes and properties by Israeli authorities, including since the beginning of this year under the Biden administration, lest we think it was only during the lawless period of the Trump administration. It's continued this year. So this new bill will have a lot of great content in it. Again, like previous bills, there's a lot of documentation. And if you're interested in really getting in the weeds about this bill, on Tuesday night, a week from tonight, we will have a webinar that will go through the details of this bill. I see somebody asked, who is supporting this new bill. There are over a dozen organizations that have already supported this new bill, including J Street, which is a change from previous bills. So we're hoping that as we've built our base and our constituencies, more and more people are coming around to supporting Palestinian rights in Congress. So we're very excited about that. Zeina, you want to take the next 2 slides? There you go.
Thank you, Jennifer. So part of the work that No Way to Treat a Child campaign, and that's a great way for everybody to get involved. We actually, in one of the groups, we had somebody who was from DC, and what do? We can't send a letter to our Congress people. This is a great, because they're from DC, so they don't have representation, but this is a great way. There's a petition, there's multiple, but 2 prominent ones right now. One is release all Palestinian children detainees amid COVID-19 pandemic. It's been signed by, I believe, over 16,000. It's gotten over 16,000 signatures. It was released in 2020. And basically, it's exactly what it is. It calls for the release of Palestinian child prisoners, because the first case had just been released in late July. You know, they became aware of the first case of COVID in July, and so with the close proximity and the sanitation, poor sanitation, all of that, there's a big danger for the children. So this petition calls on the release of all Palestinian child detainees in the during the COVID-19 pandemic. The other, and next slide, please. And I think it's in the chat, thank you. And then the next really important petition is ending solitary confinement for Palestinian child prisoners. President Joe Biden, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson signed on to this, I believe, in the solitary confinement, or hold on, let me just make sure. Solitary confinement was recently launched in January. And it's inhumane to hold children in military. It's really not okay to hold Palestinian child prisoners in military prisons, but it's even more so horrible to hold them in solitary confinement. So a letter was written, which is what this is, the petition, to President Joe Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to let them know that we urge them to sign on to this and to end the solitary confinement of Palestinian children. It is inhumane. So you can find both these petitions in the chat right now. Please sign them. They go directly to your representatives, and share them widely, not just within your state, everywhere. They're really, really important to bring attention to the issue, but also you are taking action, personal action, and making change.
Thank you. We do have a lot of resources. I've mentioned this a few times. Sometimes it's hard to find it on the No Way to Treat a Child website. So I just put a couple of images up here. There is a section under resources where you can find some toolkits. So, we've spelled out like how to approach your member of Congress, what is a handy fact sheet, what have other faith-based organizations done in support of the issue? Many faith-based groups have passed resolutions. We're going to talk about in a minute, including some Quaker meetings passing minutes. The next slide, you'll see one tool that I think will appeal to my Quaker friends here is we have a letter to the editor tool where on the website you type in your zip code and at the letter to the editor section, and it will populate the local newspapers in your area. And then it also gives you some suggested text that you could use in sending a letter to your editor. So I know people on this call like to write letters. So this is one way to not just talk about it to your member of Congress, but also to your neighbors and people in your community. We've often found as well that when you write a letter to the editor in your local paper and you mention the name of your congressperson, whether they're supporting or not supporting or whatever, that does get picked up by their office. So you know, little vain. They like to know when their name appears in the press. So they do have staff members who are checking that kind of thing. So that's another way of influencing. Next slide. If you use social media, and we hope you do, you can follow the campaign on a lot of different places. On Facebook, if you just type in "No Way to Treat a Child" and in the search engine, you'll see the Facebook page for No Way to Treat a Child. If you like it, click the like button. You'll see that in your news feed, and the news, any breaking news or new resources will always appear on Facebook. We're also active on Twitter. And just recently, the campaign has a full-time media person. So we're very excited about that. The next slide is a slide that we put together at AFSC, Lucy. Yeah. About Quaker activism. And we have a whole page on our website that has resources like the graphic that we showed you earlier about the stages of detention, videos that you might want to use, talking points, as well as a link to minutes that have been passed in various Quaker monthly meetings and yearly meetings. So if you're interested in going that route with your community, you can look at some examples there. And next slide. Most recently, our friends in the Northwest Quarterly meeting passed a very nice minute that talks about the treatment of children and encourages members in that part of the country to engage with their elected officials on this issue. So it's a great example from our Northeast. I think I said Northwest, but it is. Oh no, it does say Northwest. Friends. So the next slide is just to encourage you. I think, oh boy, we're right at time. 1 minute to go. How about that? We want to encourage you to stay in touch with us. We are always checking the info at nowaytotreatachild.org website. Any question that you have from tonight's workshop or any questions about the new bill or anything, feel free to shoot us an email. We also answer the Palestine activism at afsc.org email address. And finally, I think there probably are some members on this call who are part of the Quaker Palestine Israel Network. It's a network of friends across the country who have a particular interest in Palestine, whether they've worked at the Friends schools or been lucky to go on delegations or have other connections with Palestinians, are part of that network, and they engage in a lot of important work as a community and with other faith partners, both on this child detention campaign and other campaigns for Palestinian rights. So with that, I think we'll sign off for the evening. I want to thank you all so much for spending time with us, and it's been such a pleasure to be here tonight with Zeina. It's was fun to work on this together, and I think you joined me in yeah, feeling so appreciative of your activism and commitment to the issue. And Lucy and Khalik behind the scenes, thank you so much for helping us with our presentation.
And just want to clarify, it's Northwest Quarterly meeting of New England.
New England. Okay, that's what, yeah, thank you. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not Northwest. Thank you. Northeast, Northwest. So thank you so much, friends.
Good night.
Good night.